I've heard this rumor. Some people are speculating there's not going to be a 2024 election. And I find it kind of silly because that's a huge departure from where we're at. But we are in a dark place. So part of me starts to, grow concerned. Concerned that I don't know how, if those kind of crazy ideas will happen, but something dark truly is happening. And we have this story, this tweet from ALX, breaking. The Biden administration has officially filed a notice of appeal in the Missouri v. Biden censorship case after a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction order barring government officials from contacting social media companies to suppress lawful speech. That's right. The Biden administration is appealing a ruling that said you do not, as the government, have the right to censor Americans' speech. This is the First Amendment. To put it simply, Democrats, the Biden administration, the corporate press are all in alignment that the Constitution should be overturned. Okay, perhaps a little hyperbolic, but I'm not just talking about this case. Let's talk about COVID mandates. Yeah. How about this? The Third Amendment was actually violated when several jurisdictions ordered landlords could not evict individuals. That was the government saying, I kid you not. The often ignored Third Amendment states that the government cannot quarter soldiers in private homes. And when the COVID mandates came down and they said you can't evict people, the government was saying if someone is a soldier with a service member in the U.S. government, they will be quartered in your house regardless of what you want. They always consider, I think someone may have actually filed the suit. I don't know if it actually went to lawsuit. But let's talk about it. The First Amendment. Obvious. Right now, the Biden administration is seeking the right to appeal a court ruling barring them from violating the First Amendment. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. On this front, I agree that we are winning. And I do think we're winning across the board. Don't get me wrong. It's about the intentions of the Democrats, the corporate press, and the corporate establishment. The Second Amendment's obvious. You've got tons of unjust laws and rulings, but most importantly, you had the ATF pistol brace rule that sought to imprison people for a crime that was never a crime. That's right. The ATF just said, you know what? We're going to criminally charge anybody who's got a pistol brace attached to a weapon because we now determine it's a short-barreled rifle. Yeah, see, here's how it's supposed to work. Congress passes laws. And if you break those laws, you can be indicted. Since when does the executive branch under Joe Biden have the authority to decree you've committed a crime? I mentioned the Third Amendment. Let's talk about the Fourth Amendment. Unlawful search and seizure. Let's be real. Biden didn't invent this. The neocons had their hand in that one, but we get it. They're spying on your web data. They've been for a long time. That's it. The Fifth Amendment. You want to talk about all of the, we've got between the Fifth and the Sixth, the right to a speedy trial, a jury of your peers, the right to avoid self-incrimination. We can talk about the IRS all day. This is one of the best arguments the libertarians brought forward. Self-incrimination. If it is illegal to not pay taxes, requiring you to incriminate yourself to the IRS by reporting your income violates the Fifth Amendment. That one I find kind of hilarious. It's like, yeah, it's overtly true. But let's just talk about January 6th. Yeah. The people who have been locked up for years without charge or trial. Let's talk about Abdulrahman al-Awlaki. The Constitution is basically Swiss cheese at this point. And the fear I have is that with the powerful interests in the corporate press and the neo-lib, neocon establishment, yeah, we're headed towards something dark. Maybe the idea that there wouldn't be an election is silly because, these corrupt individuals certainly want there to be at least a mock election. But this is why some people are actually arguing they don't think we can make it that far. Again, I think that's a bit bold to claim. We'll see what happens in 2028. Not that, because you got a lot of years between now and then. But if things keep going this way, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we move forward as a country. The Constitution being completely under attack across the board. Now, don't get me wrong. You got some amendments up there. I think, what is the seventh one? That's like the civil lawsuits for $20 or something like that. Yeah, okay. Some of them are a bit silly. 9th and 10th, states' rights. It's interesting whether or not states will actually retain their rights. I mean, you can take a look at the fervor over things like Roe v. Wade. You can take a look at the border crisis. I got to be honest. The Constitution is being treated like garbage. You can go back to 2020 and talk about the rights of the vice president, how the media claimed he had none, but then they tried to pass a law removing the vice president's authority. You see how this game is being played. Let's start with this story from the New York Times, and you'll understand. The Biden administration is seeking to overturn the First Amendment. But let's take a look at how the corporate press frames this story. Ruling puts social media at crossroads of disinformation and free speech. The case, which could alter how the government battles disinformation, full stop. The government is not supposed to be in the business of determining truth. But here we are. They say it's a flashpoint in a broader effort by conservatives to document what they contend is a liberal conspiracy to silence their views. Oh boy. They say, 2 months after President Biden took office, his top digital advisor emailed officials at Facebook, urging them to do more to limit the spread of vaccine hesitancy on the social media platform. Full stop. By what right does the government have the authority to ask a private platform to control speech? This violates the First Amendment in every obvious way. At the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, officials held weekly sync meetings with Facebook, once emailing the company 16, quote, misinformation posts. And in the summer of 2021, the Surgeon General's top aide repeatedly urged Google, Facebook, and Twitter to do more to combat disinformation. The examples are among dozens of interactions described in a 155-page ruling by a federal judge in Louisiana, who on Tuesday imposed temporary but far-reaching limits on how members of Mr. Biden's administration can engage with social media companies. The government appealed the ruling on Wednesday. The case is a flashpoint in the broader effort by conservatives to document what they contend is a liberal conspiracy by Democrats and tech company executives to silence their views. I want to tell you what evil is. Evil is, there's a lot of different definitions, but I view it as like destruction for the sake of destruction, harm for the sake of harm, or harm for self-interest and self-gain. I view the good as working towards a better future for everybody, finding compromise and a balance between our rights and how we all choose to live together. And I should clarify that our rights are not up for negotiation, but we do try to figure out what the limits on constitutional protections are. That is to say, there are limits to what some people argue you can say whatever you want. I'm not a free speech absolutist. There are difficult questions there. But this is the point. The good is, how can I figure out how you and I live together peacefully? These people are evil. Conspiracy, conservatives, Democrats. Let's talk about truth. I'm not a conservative. They'll argue that I am. I hold many liberal views. In fact, I would probably fall more into the centrist position. I think it's funny when I have conversations with liberals and I'm like, I think this show's actually fairly centrist. You know, Timcast IRL and Timcast, in that some of my views are more liberal, some of my views are more conservative, which is what centrism typically is. But they don't hold those views. Everything is either right-wing or normal to them. But let's talk about this. They contend as a liberal conspiracy by Democrats. The New York Times. You're literally lying about what's going on. You're literally misleading people in an effort to gain political power. It taps into the fury on the right about how social media companies have treated stories about the origins of COVID, the 2020 election, and Hunter Biden, the president's son. Big tech companies are silencing conservatives. That's not enough up for debate. They've admitted it. There have been whistleblowers. We know they do it. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative who thinks liberals are doing it. These things are actually happening. Even Threads, the new platform, is censoring individuals. We know that the media suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story. We know that resulted in a change in perception of the Bidens and benefited them in the election. These aren't conspiracies people are contending. These are things widely reported and factually true. You get it now? The New York Times is lying. They say the final outcome could shape the future of First Amendment law in a rapidly changing media environment and alter how far the government can go in trying to prevent the spread of potentially dangerous information, particularly in an election or during emergencies like a pandemic. The government's actions at the heart of the case were intended largely as public health measures. But Tuesday's order instead viewed the issue through the filter of partisan culture wars. asking whether the government violated the First Amendment by unlawfully threatening the social media companies who censor speech that Mr. Biden's administration found distasteful and potentially harmful to the public. That's literally what happened. Biden officials contacted big tech and said these things should be removed. It's your own policy, by the way. The government has no right to do this. The case was brought by 2 Republican attorneys general, and 5 individuals who campaigned against masks argued that vaccines did not work, opposed lockdowns, and pushed drugs that medical experts denounce as ineffective, like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And it is being overseen by Judge Terry A. Doughty, who was appointed by President Donald J. Trump and has previously expressed little skepticism about debunked claims from vaccine skeptics. In one case, Judge Doughty accepted as fact the claim that COVID-19 vaccines do not prevent transmission of the disease. Let's play the old milquetoast fence sitter game. Let me say this. I am not convinced of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Not at all. I strongly recommend you find a good doctor, one you trust, and can answer these questions. I do not believe it is fair to say, as I had the debate with Alex Stein, that all doctors are bad. That's insane to me. Clearly, there are a lot of bad doctors. To what percentage, I don't know. But you can find good doctors and you don't have to be rich to do it. The idea that there are no Trump supporting doctors anywhere is just weird to me. There are clearly doctors who are leading the cause against certain views in the medical establishment. They exist. Find a doctor you trust. Don't get your advice from podcasters, other than to go to a doctor. But let me say this. I don't know enough about masks at this point. I think even YouTube has removed the rule saying if you said masks didn't work before, they'd ban you. Vaccines did not work as a fairly vague and nebulous statement. If we're talking about transmission, there are reports that I will show you in a second that say they don't stop the transmission, and people who got the vaccine still got sick. If that's your definition of not working, then okay, it's an opinion statement. Here's my favorite. In one previous case, Judge Doughty accepted as fact the claim that COVID-19 vaccines do not prevent transmission of the disease. They claim that was debunked. Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you. All I can do is show you this. Here's Tablet Magazine. Tablet Magazine says vaccines never prevented the transmission of COVID. I don't know if that's absolute. All I know is NewsGuard certified. Talk to a doctor. Literally, I mean, I'm not saying go to a random doctor and just take every word they say as law. I'm saying you got to do the research. You got to find someone you know and trust who is a good doctor. But here is the FDA in 2020 saying, quote, nor is there evidence that the vaccine prevents transmission of SARS-CoV-2 from person to person. I don't know what that means. That's what's cited in these studies. That's what's cited by this judge. And perhaps it's true. Don't take my word for it. All I can do is tell you what they have reported, what the FDA has said. It's entirely possible that information has been updated since then. However, Tablet Magazine reported this in October of 2022. So take it with a grain of salt. My point is this. If a judge were to see a statement from the from the FDA, not the FBI, and assert that they must be the experts, how are you going to come out and claim it's a debunked claim when the FDA is the premise for why the judge thinks this? You see how the media lies? Judge Doughty was confirmed in 2018 by a vote of 98-0 in the Western District of Louisiana, et cetera, et cetera. Liberty interests of individuals mandated to take the COVID-19 vaccine outweigh any interest generated by the mandatory administration of vaccines. There's a quote. The judge's preliminary injunction is already having an impact. A previously scheduled meeting on threat identification on Thursday between State Department officials and social media executives was abruptly canceled. These are the dirty games that these people play. Let's go back to Ohio. Ohio passed I think it was Ohio, or it might have been Indiana. I think Indiana. So one of these states passed abortion restrictions. Might have been Ohio. A young girl who was raped sought an abortion in a separate state. And a big stink was made about how they couldn't get it in their home state and how horrible this was. But the reality was the government came out and actually said they were completely exempt and would have been able to get this procedure because it was a young girl who had been abused. They lied. The political stunt was a hoax intended to gain political power and manipulate you into thinking that there were no exceptions for people in these circumstances. This is where we're at right now. They're lying about what is actually going on, saying, oh, no, we're forced to cancel this meeting because of this ruling. No, the ruling specifically said the only thing you couldn't do was bar people's speech. is it actually exempted them. It said, you can meet for issues of national security. You know what's actually happening? What's actually being exposed? The government likely intended, the Biden administration likely intended to seek suppression of speech under the guise of national security, and now they cannot do it. Reminds me of Florida. The DeSantis administration banned children attending adult sex performances. And then one city, a county, canceled their Pride event and said, oh no, because of Ron DeSantis, we can't have Pride. The real question is, what were you planning on doing at your Pride event? Please explain this one to me. Yeah, they're either lying and trying to make you think that something, it's a manipulation, it's a trick. You say, no one's allowed to drink, moonshine. And they go, now I have to throw away all my beer. No one told you couldn't have beer. But they're lying, trying to trick the regular people to make it seem like one side is being completely unreasonable. I remember this story about, this is back when I was working at Fusion. It was about the Religious Freedom Act or something that's passed in some state. And so I read the bill over and over again, and I read some analyses of the bill. And it basically just said that people would have the right to practice their religion or something like that. And the media kept saying it would make gay marriage illegal or something ridiculous. And I'm like, I'm trying to cover this and I can't find anywhere that it says this, nor any legal opinion to back this up. Genuinely was trying to figure out what they meant by it. And we tried our hardest to understand what the argument was. And in the end, me and a few of the other employees, and these other employees were fairly liberal, they were just like, I don't know how we actually move forward beyond this, this video, like doing more of the story, because we can't figure out what they're actually saying. It doesn't say this anywhere. The arguments put forward by the left were not true, and we couldn't justify it with any citations or facts, so we abandoned it. But these people, they're liars, and this is where we're at. The Biden administration is actively trying to overturn the First Amendment. This is not being cute. This is factually true. The government, the Biden administration, I should say, was barred from getting people banned for their political views, and they have appealed it, seeking the right to go to large private organizations and silence the American populace. It's just right in front of us. Last night we were talking about January 6ers. There's a guy who's been in prison for over 2 years, 2.5 years now, without charge or trial. Nonviolent trespass. Effectively. They haven't charged him, so we don't really know, but nonviolent guy who was there. They told him that he would have to take a plea agreement where he apologizes and denounces Trump, saying Trump made him do it. He said no. So they've kept him locked up without charge or trial. If you think the Constitution at this point is doing anything for you, I'm sorry. These people have violated every norm. They have violated all of our cultural values. And so I talk about civil war. And the reason, they're trying to imprison the front runner for the Republican Party. They are trying to imprison, quite literally, the front runner, period. Donald Trump is the favorite right now to win. I don't know that he will. I don't. But he is the favorite. Daily Mail reports Trump leads Biden in swing states that will decide the 2024 election. New poll spells disaster for president, with third-party candidate Cornel West taking away votes he needed to win, as well as RFK. Donald Trump may be leading by a hair, but currently he's the front runner, period. He's beating Biden, DeSantis, RFK, Newsom, Vivek, you name it. Tim Scott. Trump is beating every single person in the polls. And so they're trying to put him in prison. What do you think will happen if they do? He's an old man. It's not going to be some story like, some historical figure, Mandela, for instance, who gets in prison, comes out, and then, actually leads. Trump's too old for that. They are following in these footsteps that so many other countries have that just lead to destruction. I think January 6th proves it all too well. The people who are currently being held without charge or trial, and there's hundreds, I think over 100, sorry, about 150, and plans for, I think, 1,000 more. That's what Matt Brainer was telling us. When they begin arresting people without charge or trial, do you believe that people will have faith in the system that things are being done properly? Or do you think order is breaking down to the point where people will just stop following laws? The system is confidence. The belief that if you do wrong, you will be held accountable. The reason why Ben Franklin was correct in his assessment of Blackstone's formulation, the founding fathers believed in innocence until proven guilty, is because if regular people, if the average citizen believes that no matter what they do, no matter how good they are, they could go to prison and no one will fight for them, they have no incentive to be a good person. But if the people genuinely believe that the system will protect them at all costs, they have every reason to behave and be good citizens. If the Biden administration has begun arresting innocent people without charge or trial, violating their constitutional rights, for what incentive does anyone have to follow the Biden administration? At a certain point, people lose confidence, believe that Biden's completely illegitimate, and then stop following the laws enforced by his administration. This is how you end up with civil war. And this is where we are now. I'm going to do a bigger breakdown in a couple hours up at 4 p.m. on the status of the election, because it does look like Trump is going to win. But this story was just too dang shocking for me. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up at 4, as I mentioned. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.